A poor woman left flowers on a grave. Until the CEO appeared and said, "That's my wife's grave too." Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain had softened to a quiet mist over the small hillside cemetery. Gray clouds hung low, wrapping the morning in silence. Rows of marble stones stretched across the grass, their edges glistening with water. Among them walked a woman in a faded brown coat, her shoes damp from the mud. Her name was Lila Carter, though few people ever said her last name anymore. In her hands, she carried a small porcelain vase. A hairline crack ran across its side, sealed long ago with glue that had turned the color of old ivory. Inside it, she had arranged wild daisies and baby's breath, flowers she picked from an empty lot behind her apartment. They were not much, but they were what she could offer. She knelt before a grave that bore no name she knew. The stone was simple, etched with a date and a single word, Grace. Lila had come here every Sunday for the past year, leaving flowers for a stranger because it comforted her own loss. Her husband, Daniel, had died 2 years earlier, after an illness they could not afford to treat. The hospital bills had taken everything they had saved, and still she lost him. Every time she placed flowers on this grave, she whispered the same prayer. That wherever Daniel was, he knew she had not stopped trying to be kind. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the stillness. Lila turned. A tall man in a black coat was standing a few feet away, holding an umbrella. His shoes were polished, his expression unreadable, and even through the fog she could tell he did not belong in this quiet place. He looked at the flowers, then at the vase, then finally at her. His voice was deep, steady, but carried something fragile. "Please," he said softly. "Do not move those flowers." Lila froze. "I am sorry," she replied quickly. "I did not mean any disrespect. I just thought this grave looked lonely." The man shook his head, his gaze fixed on the stone. "It is not lonely," he whispered. "That is my wife's grave." The words hung in the damp air. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The drizzle tapped gently on the umbrella, on the cracked vase, on the trembling hands of the woman who suddenly felt she had trespassed into someone else's grief. "I did not know," she murmured, setting the vase down carefully. "I am so sorry." He glanced at her, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "No," he said almost to himself. "You could not have known." He crouched beside the grave, his fingers tracing the letters carved into the stone. "Grace Ward," he said quietly, as if reciting a prayer. Then he looked up. She loved daisies too. Something in his voice made Lila's chest tighten. The sincerity, the ache it mirrored her own. For a moment, the air between them was not heavy with awkwardness, but with understanding. Two people, bound by loss, standing before the same grave. She wanted to speak, but her throat tightened. Instead, she gathered her things, ready to leave him alone with his memories. But as she rose, he spoke again. "Do you come here often?" he asked. She hesitated. "Every Sunday," she admitted. "I suppose it made me feel less alone." He gave a faint, tired smile. "Then maybe we both needed the same thing." The rain began to fall harder now, and Lila instinctively held the vase to shield the flowers. The man extended his umbrella toward her without a word. She shook her head, but he insisted, holding it above them both. In the quiet that followed, the sound of the rain blended with the faint hum of wind through the trees. The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the grave, the flowers, and two souls who had forgotten what warmth felt like. That was the morning everything began. The first quiet meeting between a poor woman searching for peace and a man who had everything except it. Neither of them knew that this simple act of kindness, leaving flowers for a stranger, would change both of their lives forever. The next morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the sky washed pale blue. Sunlight spilled through the blinds of Lila's small apartment, catching the steam rising from a chipped mug of coffee. The smell was faint, more bitterness than warmth. She sat at the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the single vase on her windowsill. The daisies had already wilted, their petals curled inward, yet she could not bring herself to throw them away. Rent was due in 3 days. The envelope from her landlord lay unopened on the table, its corner darkened by a coffee stain. She had stopped counting how many late fees she owed. Instead, she had learned to count what she still had: her hands, her heart, and the will to keep showing up. That afternoon, she walked to the community clinic where she worked part-time as an assistant. The building stood on the corner of Franklin Avenue, its paint peeling, the sign missing 2 letters. But inside, there was light. The reception smelled of disinfectant and hope. Children sat beside their mothers on metal chairs. A young volunteer passed out cups of water. "Morning, Lila," called Mrs. Porter, the head nurse. "We are short on supplies again. The shipment is delayed." Lila smiled faintly. "We will make do, like always." She slipped into her routine, checking charts, bandaging scrapes, refilling bottles of sanitizer with careful precision. Every movement was deliberate, learned from years of caring without complaint. By noon, she was in exam room 3, helping an elderly woman whose blood pressure had spiked. When Lila realized the woman could not afford her medication, she hesitated only a moment before opening her own purse. "Please," Lila said softly, pressing a folded $20 bill into the woman's hand. "Buy what you need. Do not worry about paying me back." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "You are an angel, child." Lila smiled, though her heart ached. She knew she could not keep doing this forever. Every small act of kindness came with a cost. But she could not stop herself. It was how she kept her faith alive. That evening, the clinic's administrator pulled her aside. "Lila, we have to talk," he said, his tone measured. "You have been using personal funds for patient medication again, haven't you?" She nodded silently. "It is not allowed," he continued. "If the board hears about this, I will have no choice but to let you go." "I understand," Lila replied. "But if someone comes in sick, and we turn them away, what happens to them?" He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You cannot save everyone." "No," she said quietly, "but I can save one person today." That night, she stayed late to clean the waiting area. The hum of the fluorescent lights echoed in the empty hall. She collected wrappers, straightened chairs, wiped down the counter. When she stepped outside, the air had turned cold again. Across the street, a man in a dark suit was standing beside a black sedan, watching the building. For a moment, she thought it might be him, the man from the cemetery. But that seemed impossible. What would someone like him be doing in this part of town? She turned away, locking the clinic door. When she glanced back, the car was gone. The next morning, she found a letter on the reception desk. It was printed on thick paper, the logo embossed in silver at the top. To the staff of Franklin Community Clinic, it read, "A private donor has agreed to cover all pending medical supply costs for the next 12 months. Please accept this contribution as a gesture of gratitude for your service to those in need." No name was signed at the bottom. Only 3 words written in pen. "For Grace Ward." Lila's hand trembled as she read the name. Grace Ward, the woman whose grave she had tended, whose husband she had met in the rain. She folded the letter carefully and pressed it against her chest. Somewhere in her heart, a warmth began to stir. Perhaps kindness did not vanish into the air. Perhaps it traveled quietly, unseen until it found its way back. That night, she walked once more to the cemetery. The sky was clear, the stars faint but visible. She placed fresh flowers on the grave, the petals bright against the dark stone. "Thank you," she whispered, "whoever you are." Oh, behind her, unseen in the shadows near the iron gate, a tall figure stood watching. The man from before, his expression softened. He had followed her here, not to intrude, but because he could not explain why this woman's gentleness had stayed in his mind. He whispered to the wind, "Maybe Grace sent her." And for the first time in years, Ethan Ward, the man who had everything but peace, felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Hope. Days passed quietly after the letter arrived. The clinic had new supplies, new boxes of medicine, and for the first time in months, Lila did not have to worry about running out of bandages or pain relievers. Yet her thoughts kept circling back to the same name, Grace Ward. She had seen it carved in marble. She had whispered it under the rain. Now it was written on an envelope that had saved her small clinic. Whoever had sent it knew that name. And that could only mean one person. On Wednesday morning, as she rearranged the shelves, Mrs. Porter called out, "Lila, someone is here to see you." Lila turned, expecting a patient, but stopped when she saw him. The man from the cemetery stood by the doorway, his black coat neatly buttoned, a faint smile softening his otherwise composed face. "Good morning," he said gently. "I hope I am not intruding." Her heart stumbled in her chest. You are the man from the graveyard." He nodded. "Ethan Ward." His voice carried the calm confidence of someone used to being listened to. "I wanted to thank you for the flowers and for your kindness that day." Lila found her voice. "You did not have to come here." "I wanted to," he replied. "The truth is, I have been thinking about what you said, that the grave looked lonely. You were right." He paused, glancing around the small clinic. "May I ask, is this where you work?" "Yes," she said softly. "We take care of people who cannot afford hospital treatment." "Oh." Ethan looked around, noticing the worn furniture, the flickering lights, and the quiet dignity with which the staff moved. "You are doing good work," he said. "But I can see it is not easy." Lila gave a small, tired laugh. "It never is, but it matters." He studied her for a long moment. "You remind me of her," he said finally. "Your wife?" He nodded. "Grace was a nurse before I built my company. She believed in care before profit. When she passed, I lost more than a partner. I lost the person who reminded me why compassion matters." There was silence. The weight of his confession filled the room. Lila did not know what to say, so she simply nodded. "I made a donation in her name," Ethan continued, "to this clinic. It seemed like something she would have done." Lila blinked, her eyes glistening. "That was you," he smiled faintly. "I did not expect you to connect it so quickly." "Why help us?" she asked. "People like you do not usually notice places like this." He hesitated, then said, "Because you did something no one else has done in years. You cared about a grave that was not yours. That kind of kindness is rare." For a moment, they simply stood there, the quiet hum of machines and soft murmurs from the hallway surrounding them. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and took out a small card. "I am organizing a new foundation in memory of Grace. It will support community clinics like this one. I would like you to be part of it." Lila looked at the card but did not take it. "Mr. Ward, I am not qualified for anything grand. I am not a doctor. I only do what I can." "You do more than most people with 10 times your resources," he said gently. "Think about it. I will be in touch." He turned to leave, but before he stepped outside, he stopped and looked back. "By the way, the vase you bring to the cemetery, it is cracked, but you keep using it." Lila blushed slightly. "It still holds the flowers. That is enough." Ethan nodded slowly, as if her words had settled somewhere deep inside him. "Perhaps that is what strength really means," he said. Then he left. That evening, Lila walked home under the streetlights. The city was quiet, and the sound of her footsteps echoed softly against the pavement. In her hands, she held the card he had given her. It was thick, embossed with silver letters. The Grace Ward Foundation. She traced the letters with her thumb. Something inside her shifted not hope exactly, but the faint stirring of possibility. Later that night, she placed her cracked vase on the kitchen table and began cleaning the dried glue along its edges. Under the small lamplight, she saw how the fracture lines formed a delicate pattern, almost like veins of gold. She smiled faintly to herself. "It still holds the flowers," she whispered again. Across town, Ethan sat in his office, the city skyline glittering behind him. On his desk lay a single daisy he had taken from the cemetery. He turned it slowly in his hand, thinking of the woman who had reminded him that kindness did not end with loss. It began there. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt something new stirring in his chest. Not grief, not guilt, but the quiet beginning of peace. A week later, Lila stood outside a tall glass building downtown, clutching the invitation card Ethan had given her. The silver letters gleamed beneath the morning sunday. "The Grace Ward Foundation," it read. Beneath it, a line in small print. "Opening ceremony and partnership announcement." Her reflection in the glass doors looked out of place, second-hand blouse, modest skirt, hair pulled into a neat bun. She had almost turned back twice on the walk there. But something inside told her to go through with it. Inside, the lobby was bright and modern, filled with people in tailored suits and crisp dresses. A receptionist smiled warmly when she gave her name. "Mr. Ward is expecting you. Please this way." Ethan was waiting in a conference room with a view of the city. The morning light softened his sharp features. "You came," he said, genuinely pleased. "I almost did not," Lila admitted. "This is far from my world." "Maybe that is exactly why you should be here," he said. "The foundation is not about power. It is about people." He gestured to the table, where documents lay neatly arranged. "We are creating a pilot program, free mobile clinics for neighborhoods that have lost hospital access. I want your guidance on what patients truly need." Lila hesitated. "I am not a planner. I am a nurse's aide. I do not have degrees or titles." Ethan smiled faintly. "What you have is experience, empathy, and honesty. Those cannot be taught." She sat down, still nervous but curious. For the next hour, Ethan listened more than he spoke. He asked about her clinic, about supply shortages, about the stories behind each patient. When she spoke of the mother who sold her wedding ring to buy insulin, he frowned deeply. When she mentioned a veteran who had been turned away for lack of insurance, his hand tightened around his pen. At the end, he said quietly, "You are right. This system needs healing as much as the people in it." That afternoon, Ethan personally drove her back to the Franklin Clinic. The drive was quiet at first, the sound of traffic filling the silence. Then he asked, "When you said at the cemetery that the grave looked lonely, do you ever feel that way too?" She looked out the window. "Every day. But I have learned that loneliness does not mean being unloved. It just means the heart is still waiting." He glanced at her, something unspoken passing through his eyes. "I think I have been waiting too." They stopped in front of the clinic. She reached for the door handle but paused. "Mr. Ward, why me? There are hundreds of professionals who would gladly work with you." He smiled gently. "Because professionals talk about what is efficient. You talk about what is right." She stepped out of the car, and for a brief moment, he watched her through the windshield, the afternoon light wrapping around her like a soft halo. The following weeks brought small but steady changes. The foundation's first delivery truck arrived at the clinic, stocked with new medical supplies and diagnostic equipment. Ethan visited often, sometimes to observe, sometimes just to help. The staff was astonished to see the man whose name appeared on business magazines rolling up his sleeves to unload boxes. "Mr. Ward," Mrs. Porter said one day, "people like you do not usually come down to ground level." Ethan smiled. "Maybe that is why things stay broken for so long." "Oh." Lila overheard and could not help but smile. There was something disarming about seeing him in the midst of ordinary people, laughing as he lifted crates, asking questions about blood pressure cuffs. That evening, after the clinic closed, Ethan stayed behind to help her organize the supply room. The light flickered above them, and their hands brushed when they reached for the same clipboard. For a moment they both froze. He was the first to speak. "I used to think healing meant curing what was broken. Now I think it means learning to live gently with the scars." She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "That sounds like something your wife would have said." He nodded slowly. "Maybe. Or maybe you are helping me remember her voice." Outside, the night had settled, and the sound of distant rain echoed against the windows. Neither of them moved to leave. There was no need for words. The air between them carried a quiet understanding, something fragile, something beginning. When Lila finally stepped out into the rain, she realized she was not shivering. The world around her still carried its burdens, its pain, its unhealed wounds, but for the first time in a long while, she did not feel alone in carrying them. Somewhere behind her, inside that small clinic that now glowed with light, Ethan Ward stood by the window, watching her walk away with the same cracked vase in her hands. And though he did not say it aloud, the thought settled deep within him. Perhaps this is how healing truly begins, not in hospitals or boardrooms, but in moments shared between broken souls who choose to care anyway. Several weeks passed, and the rhythm between Lila and Ethan settled into something gentle, almost unspoken. He continued visiting the clinic, sometimes bringing new supplies, sometimes simply sitting in the waiting room, observing the quiet strength of people who had learned to live with pain. Lila grew used to his presence, though she never stopped feeling a flutter in her chest each time their eyes met. One Friday evening, the clinic was quieter than usual. Only a few patients remained. Lila was finishing paperwork when she noticed Ethan standing near the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," he said, handing her one. She smiled. "You remembered how I like it. 2 sugars," he said, "and a little more patience than most people." They laughed softly. For a moment, the sound felt like sunlight. As they talked, the conversation drifted from work to life, from the clinic's struggles to their own memories. Ethan told her about the early years of his company, how he had once slept in the office and lived on instant noodles. Lila spoke of her husband Daniel, of the long nights caring for him during his illness. When she mentioned the hospital, her voice faltered. "He died in St. Mary's Hospital. I tried everything, but they turned him away for not having enough insurance." Ethan's expression darkened. "St. Mary's," he repeated slowly. "That was the same hospital where my wife was admitted before she passed." Lila looked up sharply. "Your wife was there too?" "Yes," he said quietly. "She went in for a minor surgery. There were complications. The reports never made sense to me. I asked for details, but the hospital claimed everything was handled properly." A chill ran down Lila's spine. "I worked at St. Mary's before I came to the community clinic. I was a nurse's aide there." Ethan turned to her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You did?" She nodded, her hands trembling slightly. "It was a long time ago, but I remember that night. There was a patient named Grace Ward. The staff whispered her name because of who her husband was. I was assigned to that wing." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You were on that floor?" "Yes," she whispered. "But I was not there when she—" Her voice broke. "They pulled me away to cover another emergency. When I returned, everything was chaos. They told me the monitor malfunctioned, but later, one of the technicians said the machine had been flagged for maintenance weeks earlier." The room seemed to close in around them. Ethan stepped back, his face pale. "You knew," he said, his voice strained. "I did not," she cried. "I was never told the truth. I thought it was just a tragic accident." He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "I spent years trying to understand why she died. All that time I blamed myself. Now you are telling me there was a cover-up." Lila shook her head desperately. "I am telling you there might have been. I wanted to forget that place, but the memory never left me." Silence filled the room. The rain outside began to fall harder, tapping against the window like distant footsteps. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice low but steady. "If what you are saying is true, then St. Mary's is still hiding something, and I intend to find out what." Lila swallowed hard. "It could destroy your company's reputation if they were using your equipment." He looked at her, eyes fierce with determination. "Then let it. If the truth cost me everything, so be it. Grace deserved better, and so did you." Lila wanted to believe him, but fear pressed against her chest. The path they were stepping onto was dark and uncertain. Yet as she met his gaze, she saw something in him that steadied her, a man not running from grief anymore, but walking toward justice. The lights flickered once, then steadied. Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Inside, 2 people stood side by side, their shared pain shaping into a quiet resolve. It was the moment when kindness became courage, and grief turned into purpose. The next morning, Lila woke to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. It was a message from Ethan. "Meet me at St. Mary's Hospital at 9. I need to see the truth with my own eyes." Her stomach tightened as she read it. The thought of returning to that place made her heart pound. The memories she had buried for years were waiting behind those hospital walls. But something stronger than fear pulled her out of bed. When she arrived, the hospital looked unchanged. The same white walls, the same scent of antiseptic. Even the receptionist desk seemed frozen in time. Ethan stood near the elevators, his expression tense but determined. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I know this is not easy for you." Lila shook her head. "It is not easy for you either." "How?" Together, they took the elevator to the 5th floor, the surgical wing. The doors opened to a hallway lined with closed patient rooms. Lila's steps slowed. "Room 512, she whispered. That was her room. Ethan paused outside the door. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then he pushed it open. The room was empty now, clean and silent, but the air still felt heavy. Lila could almost hear the faint beeping of monitors, the echo of hurried footsteps, the night she could never forget. Ethan walked to the window, staring out at the gray skyline. "I remember standing right here," he said. "I had stepped out to take a phone call. When I came back, it was over." His voice cracked slightly. "They told me it was cardiac arrest, that nothing could have been done." Lila's hands clenched. "They lied," she said softly. "That machine, the cardiac monitor, had a fault in the software. The alarm delay was reported 3 times before that night. I overheard the technician say it, but the report disappeared." Ethan turned to her, his eyes sharp. "Do you still know anyone here who might remember?" "There is one," she said. "Dr. Harris. He was the head of the neurology department. He may still be here." They found him in his office, older now, his hair streaked with gray. His eyes widened when he saw Ethan Ward standing before him. "Mr. Ward," he said, rising quickly. "This is a surprise." Ethan's voice was calm but cold. "Dr. Harris, I need the full report from the night of my wife's death, the real one." The doctor hesitated. "I do not know what you mean." Lila stepped forward. "Doctor, please. You know there was a malfunction. The equipment failed, and the hospital covered it up. I was here. I saw the technician take the report." "No." The doctor's face paled. "You do not understand. There were orders from above. The administration wanted to protect the hospital's donors. They said it would ruin reputations, yours included, Mr. Ward." Ethan's expression darkened. "My wife died because of that negligence, and they worried about reputations?" The doctor sighed heavily and opened a drawer. From inside, he pulled out a sealed envelope. "I kept a copy," he said quietly. "I should have spoken years ago." Ethan took the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside were printed logs, timestamps, maintenance records, warnings ignored. Lila's breath caught as she saw the date. It was the night Grace Ward had died. Ethan stared at the pages, his jaw tightening. "This proves it," he said. "They let it happen." The doctor nodded. "If this becomes public, the board will deny everything. You will face a storm you cannot control." Ethan folded the documents, his voice steady. "Then let it come. My wife's name deserves the truth." Lila looked at him, her eyes glistening. "You could lose everything." He met her gaze. "Maybe that is the price for peace." As they left the office, the hallway felt different, lighter, somehow. For the first time since that night, Lila felt the weight on her chest ease slightly. Outside, the morning had turned bright. Ethan stood on the hospital steps, the envelope clutched in his hand. "You helped me see what I refused to face," he said. Lila smiled faintly. "And you helped me stop running from the past." He looked at her then, the wind catching the edge of his coat. "Whatever happens next, we face it together." And for the first time, the word together did not sound fragile. It sounded like a promise. The following days moved like a storm. Ethan's decision to reveal the truth about St. Mary's Hospital sent ripples through every circle of power he once belonged to. News outlets began calling his office, investors demanded explanations, and board members of his company urged him to stay silent, but he would not. Lila watched all of it unfold from the small clinic. The television in the waiting room played endless news segments, showing Ethan's face beside headlines that read, "Chief Executive Officer exposes hospital scandal and medical foundation under fire." When he finally appeared at the clinic, he looked tired but unbroken. His tie was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He handed Lila a folder filled with legal documents. "I filed the case this morning," he said. "The investigation has begun." Lila hesitated before opening it. "Are you sure you want to do this? They will attack you." "They already have," he said quietly. "But it does not matter. Grace's death will not be buried under money or lies." For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Lila said softly, "I will stand with you, whatever happens." Oh, the next week tested that promise. Anonymous calls flooded the clinic, accusing Lila of betrayal, claiming she had manipulated Ethan for fame. She ignored them, but each message left a deeper bruise. One afternoon, she found a newspaper slipped under the clinic door. The headline read, "Whistleblower Nurse Involved in CEO's Marriage Scandal." Her hands trembled as she read it. The photograph showed her leaving the hospital beside Ethan. They had taken her kindness and turned it into gossip. That evening, she walked home in the rain, her coat soaked through. The city lights blurred behind her tears. When she reached her apartment, Ethan was waiting by the door, holding an umbrella. "Why did you not call me?" he asked gently. "Because this is my fault," she whispered. "I brought you into this mess." He shook his head. "No, Lila. You gave me the courage to face it. But you are losing everything," she said, her voice trembling. "Your company, your name." He stepped closer, his eyes steady. "If telling the truth costs me everything, then I was holding the wrong things all along." Lila's breath caught. "What about me? What happens when they come after the clinic next?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Then we rebuild it. Honesty cannot destroy what is real." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet earth. Lila looked up at him, and for the first time since the storm began, she believed him. Days later, government inspectors arrived at St. Mary's Hospital. The reports were confirmed. The machine's malfunction had been hidden deliberately. The administration was suspended, and the case was made public. Ethan stood before the press, calm and composed. "This is not about revenge," he said. "It is about accountability. Healing begins when we stop pretending that wrong is right." When he stepped off the podium, Lila was waiting for him near the exit. The crowd around them buzzed with cameras and questions, but he ignored all of it. He reached for her hand, and she took it without hesitation. Together, they walked through the flashing lights toward the quiet street beyond. Their fingers intertwined, a small act of defiance against a world that had tried to break them both. Months passed after the trial ended. The headlines faded, the noise quieted, and the truth finally stood clear. The court ruled in favor of the victims' families, confirming that the hospital had covered up the equipment failure. Ethan's company lost several contracts, but his name was no longer a symbol of wealth. It was a symbol of integrity. One crisp autumn morning, Lila received a letter sealed with the familiar silver crest of the Grace Ward Foundation. Inside, there was a handwritten note from Ethan. It read, "Come to the cemetery this Sunday. I have something to show you." When she arrived, the air was cool, and golden leaves drifted across the path. Ethan stood by the same grave where they had first met, but now, the space around it looked different. A small garden surrounded the headstone, filled with wild daisies and lavender. At its center stood her old porcelain vase, no longer cracked, but carefully mended with gold seams that shimmered in the sunlight. Lila's breath caught. "You fixed it." Ethan smiled softly. "It is called kintsugi, the art of mending broken things with gold. Grace once told me that love and kindness work the same way. You showed me that was true." She knelt, touching the vase gently. The golden lines glowed warm beneath her fingers. "It is more beautiful now," she whispered. "So are you," he said quietly. "You taught me that healing does not mean going back to what was whole. It means honoring the cracks that made us human." For a moment, they stood in silence as the wind moved through the trees. The sunlight touched their faces, soft and forgiving. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a key with a silver tag that read, "The Wildflower Center." "It is a place we are building," he said. "A home for families who cannot afford medical care. You will run it, Lila. You are the heart of it." Her eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, he shook his head gently. "You already did enough. This is my way of saying thank you." "Oh." They stood together beside the grave that had once been a place of sorrow and now had become the beginning of something new. The cracked vase gleamed in the sun, a quiet reminder that broken things, when healed with love, could shine brighter than they ever did before. 1 year later, the Wildflower Center opened its doors. The building stood at the edge of the city, surrounded by open fields and sunlight. Its walls were painted soft cream, the same color as the daisies that lined the entrance. Above the front gate, a bronze plaque read, "Founded in memory of Grace Ward, for those who stayed kind even when broken." Lila walked through the halls that morning, greeting patients and volunteers. The sound of laughter filled the air, children running between chairs, nurses humming to quiet music. The place was alive, warm, hopeful, real. She paused in front of the reception desk where her old porcelain vase now stood, filled with bright wildflowers. The golden cracks gleamed softly under the morning light. Ethan entered quietly behind her, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You still keep the vase here," he said. She smiled. "It reminds me why we built this place." He handed her a cup. "I think Grace would have loved it here." "I think she already does," Lila replied, looking toward the garden outside. "Every flower that grows here feels like a thank you." Ethan watched her for a moment. "You gave her memory purpose, and you gave mine peace." Lila turned to face him. "And you gave my life back its meaning." He took her hand gently. "So, what now?" "We keep healing," she said, "one person at a time." Outside, a breeze carried the scent of fresh earth and flowers through the open doors. In the courtyard, families sat together, holding hands, sharing stories. The world was far from perfect, but here, for a little while, it felt whole. As the sun rose higher, its light poured across the wildflower center, touching the vase on the counter, the walls, the people within them. Ethan and Lila stood side by side, watching the morning unfold. Lila whispered, "Maybe love does not erase pain. It just teaches us how to live with it, gently." Ethan smiled. "And to turn it into something beautiful." "No." The camera would have lingered there on the flowers, the light, and 2 hearts that had learned to bloom again after loss. And with that, their story came full circle. From grief to grace, from brokenness to healing, from loneliness to love.